Okay, let's see if the live is working there, and I'll get started in just a second as soon as folks join in, and I think we have a couple folks joining in. So the first thing you may wonder why I'm wearing these latex gloves today. I'm doing that because I'm going to be talking a little bit about some ceramics, some really cool stuff here. So using these different kind of gloves. And as Emperor Palpatine once said to Darth Vader, thanks for joining me. I appreciate you coming. Thanks so much. I got some really cool stuff to show you here. I got some cool artifacts to show you over here on the side. So let's get to it. The first thing I'm going to show you, though, is I'm going to show you this. I'm going to hold this up here. See if you can see this here. Okay. So this is a presidential china. This belonged to James Monroe. This is a Navette platter, hard-paste porcelain. And I want to show you this first because there are 20 stars going around the eagle. And so see if anyone can tell me, with 20 stars around there, what year that decoration would have been applied to this plate. So remember that, 20 stars, what year would that have been applied to this platter? And let me know. Oh, hey, Honor and James and Catherine, and hey, everybody. The Eye of Sauron, yes, indeed. Okay, so the first big thing I'm going to show you here is this fella right here. So look at this. Okay, so what is this? What's going on here? So this is a massive jug, right? This is a storage crock, and this would have been typical of kind of storage crocks that James Monroe would have had in his home in Oak Hill around the 1820s. So you see this, right? And this is, a typical sort of storage crock. Oh, hey, Carol, how are you? So what do I mean by that? Well, the storage crock, it's a variety of crock known as American stoneware. And you see this all over the place, right? If you go to antique shops and you go downtown, you're going to see a lot of these. So this sort of blue-gray, this is a blue-gray sort of storage crock is everywhere. And why is that? Well, this was a really sort of, this was a way for them to sort of mass manufacture and create these storage crocks in an easy way back in those days. And the way they do that, here, I'll hold this up kind of close there so you can see that, is they would decorate these slips. See this blue pattern here? Okay, can you see that? These sort of blue pattern? That's the underslip, and that is cobalt, that's cobalt oxide. So if you can see that, they would decorate with cobalt oxide, and then they would put it in the kiln. Okay, this is in the clay body, and they would fire it up, okay? And so fire it up to about 2,300 degrees. And what would happen is that would burn off all the coloring except for the blue. Okay, does that make sense? So because it's the cobalt oxide that's on there, the cobalt oxide would not burn off at the 2,300, but all the other colors would burn off. So you would get that sort of blue decoration that's on there. And so that's why they have that blue-gray sort of look to them. And that's why you see, back in the day, when you see all these old storage crocks, so many of them look like this, right? And hey, Mike, hey, Linda. So that's why so many of them look like that. They had that blue decoration because they were using cobalt oxide, and it would burn off at that temperature. Now, here's the other thing, though. If you look at it really closely, okay, I'm going to hold it up super close. Okay, can you see that? Okay, so if you look at that, that's sort of an orange peel kind of texture, right? You see that on there? That sort of orange peel texture? It's translucent, and it's the exact result of salt glazing, okay? And I'm not talking about other kinds of glazing. I'm talking about specifically salt glazing. And it's one of the most prolific techniques in early American pottery making and other pottery making as well. And so salt glazing, it not only added, sort of texture to it, but it also added an extra layer of protection, and it vitrified. And so salt glazing it's really cool how they did it. It's actually really cool. Okay, so what they would do is they would fire up the kiln. Okay, so imagine, usually, like a lot of times they would use what was called a groundhog kiln. So imagine my hand is sort of the side view of a kiln. That's sort of, it's almost like a long tunnel, kind of, if you can imagine. So it's the side view of the tunnel, and up here is the chimney of the kiln, okay? And then right here is that this part of it is where the fire of the kiln would be. Okay, so you have like a brick, you have bricks here, a brick arch going over, and this is the side view. All right, so they would fire it up right here. They would start slowly. They would load it up with the bisque, with the greenware, the pre-fired kiln or pottery, and they would start adding fire to the opening, to the front part of here, sort of the fireplace of it. Okay, and they would do it slowly. Okay, you don't want to do it all at once, because if you start doing a massive fire into the kiln, everything would explode. It was, just blow me. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. So you start adding slow fire to it and building it up and building up and building up. And what happens is that heat starts pushing through and going through the main body and then up through the chimney part. So you start seeing the heat going up through. So you start increasing as you add wood, increasing, nice dry wood, increasing heat would keep going and going. And so you're talking hours, folks. I mean, you're not talking like, doing it really fast. It's hours and hours and hours. A lot of times they would fire these all night long, okay? It would be almost a community event sometimes. So you see these massive groundhog kilns, and you ask how big would the groundhog kiln? Oh gosh, they can be up to 30, 40 feet long sometimes. The ones that I've seen ones in China that are, a good 70 yards. I mean, they're massive, huge kilns. But it just depends on how big the pottery was. And so the heat starts going and it gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And right when it gets to about 1600 degrees, 1625 degrees in there somewhere, what they would do is they would start pouring salt in slits. So you could see this. I mean, there's different ways of doing it, but this is the way that I've seen doing it. They start pouring salts into slits in the top, and the salt would go in there, right? And so they had it would instantly go in, and the heat would vaporize the chloride in the soda. Okay, so as the salt's going in, it goes bam, and it starts just vaporizing, and it starts coating the pottery, and you start getting that coat that's on there. You start getting that glaze that's on it, and that's what salt glaze is. So it's exactly what it sounds like. It actually is literally salt that they would pour into the kiln at those massive temperatures. So you can imagine, and the only thing that I don't know if it makes any kind of noise or anything, because I've never actually seen it done live. I've just seen pictures and diagrams. And I'm talking about salt kiln. I've seen them do live groundhog kilns, but not actually salt glazing. And so, but you can imagine sort of just vaporizing and coating with this wonderful salt glaze coat that's on here. So that to me is kind of interesting, right? So whenever you see these old pots, these old storage crocks in the antique shop, that's exactly what you're looking at. You're looking at a cobalt oxide underglaze, and that's why it's blue. And you're looking at a salt glaze that's going over. Now, salt glazing, sort of as a general mass manufacturing thing, sort of it died off somewhat in the early 20th century when they came around with other kinds of glazes and things. But it's still around. I mean, you can still see it. There's places like Jugtown in North Carolina. I believe they still do some salt glazing, and you see this a lot. So whenever you see salt glazing, it's kind of a cool sort of artisan thing now. But back in the day, it would have been a really prolific, kind of cool way to fire it up. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about this one here. Okay, so here it is. All right, so this is presidential china. This belonged to James Monroe, and I asked you earlier how with the number of stars that's around here, what year would that have been? Well, the answer is the year would have been 1817, because the year before it would have been 19 and stars. It represents the states, right? The states. And the year after it would have been 22 stars, if I'm not mistaken. So this is the year 1817, the year that James Monroe went into the White House. So this is about as presidential china as you get. I mean, if you look at it, here, let me turn it a little bit this way. I'll hold it up closer so you can see. Okay, so you have the M on there on the top for Monroe, okay? And I'll turn it around this way, very carefully. And you see the eagle, okay, with the stars going around it. And there's the 20 stars. And so, people, they ask a lot of times, what do you talk about when you talk about China? When you say China, where does the word come from? Why is it associated with this sort of the fancy sort of thing? Well, in the 16th century, Portuguese traders, here, I'll hold this up so you can see it. Portuguese traders began importing blue and white porcelain from China, okay? And Europeans, they quickly became enamored with it, right? Okay, so this is like this porcelain. that was true porcelain coming from China. I'm like, whoa, it has this wonderful sort of translucent body and masterful overglaze. And so, of course, what happened, as humans do, the race was on, right, to discover its secrets. So they started experimenting around to see if they can duplicate the porcelain that was coming from China, because in Europe at that time, in the 16th century, at that point, they didn't have porcelain in the same way that the Chinese did. So they went on this massive sort of competition to figure out the recipe, because the recipe is pretty specific. There's different recipes for porcelain, but the recipe for that was pretty specific. So they went on this massive, they tried multiple combinations of ingredients, lime, soapstone, things like that. And, potters, they speculated that maybe there was glass in the recipe, because if you look at it, it's very glassy, right? Okay. And there's translucence in the ceramic body. In fact, if you ever have a ceramic, it's super, super thin, hold it up to the light. You can actually see through really good porcelain ceramics. So they were looking at, trying to, and the first venture to sort of, moderately, comparably, come to it was the Medici porcelain factory in Florence, Italy in 1575, if I'm not mistaken. I think 1575. They came up with a recipe that was relatively comparable, but it wasn't quite the same. And that recipe that they came up with was called soft paste porcelain. Okay, so that's called soft paste porcelain. This is actually true porcelain. This is hard paste porcelain. And the soft paste porcelain was sort of the original recipe that they came up with to try to replicate the porcelain. And I actually have a piece here. That is soft paste porcelain. Okay, this is just a little from a children's china set. If you look at it, it's hard to distinguish, I understand, but you can distinguish it a little bit. The soft paste porcelain, frankly, for lack of a better word, it just has sort of a softer look to it. It's a little bit more creamy. Doesn't have that quite as hard, sort of translucent look to it, versus, and here I'll show you, versus the hard paste porcelain. That's going to be a little bit, it just has that sort of rock hard vitriol, it's waterproof and all that sort of thing. So there you go. It has that, there's the difference. There's this hard paste porcelain, President of China. Something else that's kind of cool about this is I'm going to tie it in with an artifact that I talked about earlier a few weeks ago, and that is a razor strop. And what the heck does a what does a Navat platter piece of presidential China have to do with a razor strop? Well, I'll tell you. One of the things that was sort of confusing about the piece is that if you look at it really closely, on there is an anchor. In the symbol of the American eagle, there's actually an anchor in there, which is often associated with the Navy. And so that was a little confusing because, President Monroe was never a naval officer, although, he worked obviously closely with the Navy. So it was a little confusing as to why that would be on the gold eagle, or on the eagle symbol. So why was there a Navy anchor on there? And we couldn't really figure out. One theory that I had was, one of the oldest monuments in the country is the Tripoli Monument. And the Tripoli Monument was in D.C. at the time of the War of 1812. And the Tripoli Monument was damaged by the sacking of Washington, but at least it survived the sacking of Washington by the British. And guess what else survived, more or less, was the president's house, now the White House. Like I said before, the White House was not burned to ashes. It was burned, but it was sort of gutted. There's a lot of structure that remained. So one of the theories, but the Tripoli Monument also had an anchor on there that was very similar to the symbol that's on here, a very similar anchor. So I theorized that, maybe it was sort of a nod to the Tripoli Monument because the Tripoli Monument, like the White House and like James Monroe, survived the War of 1812 and survived the attack on Washington. So maybe he was sort of giving a nod to that. And so that was one theory he had. The other, by the way, the Tripoli Monument is the oldest monument in the U.S., I think, as far for military. And I can't remember where it is right now. I think maybe down the beach. But anyway, so here comes the razor strop I was talking about. This is that razor strop that I showed a couple weeks ago. Well, when I was doing my nerd identification of this, and I looked really closely, you can't really see it, I know it's hard to see, but when I took a magnifying glass and I looked really closely at the at the symbol that's on here, there's an eagle symbol on there. Well, lo and behold, there is also an anchor on this razor strop, on this eagle symbol. And so that was sort of, at least from what I know, this is a confirmed piece that confirmed belonged to James Monroe. It actually says to James Monroe on here. So it's confirmed that it belonged to James Monroe. And there's a eagle symbol with a anchor on here, and the same kind of anchor that is on this eagle. So that was the first confirmed that I know of, the first confirmed correlation between an eagle that was associated with James Monroe and an anchor. Now, if anyone has any more information about, why the eagles in James Monroe at the time, why there might have been an anchor on there, and besides, the Navy Association, I would love to hear it. You can always email me. So I thought that was kind of neat, that there was sort of an association between a razor strop and presidential china. So presidential china, just real quick, this is kind of cool. So the president of China, whenever, and I'll just talk about this real briefly. I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about this in a Monroe Minute that I'm doing. But the presidential China sort of tradition, it sort of became, it became solidified with James Monroe in the sense that whenever the White House was sacked and it was burned to the ground, I don't know if it wasn't burned to the ground, it was sacked, but he had to sort of refurnish as they were rebuilding the White House. And you think about it, you're an incoming president, you're going to have diplomats, you're going to have all kinds of people coming in. You have to have your house furnished, and you have to have it, ready to receive visitors. So one of the things that James was tasked with was he had to order furniture, and one of the things he had to do was, of course, order china. And that was one of the main things that he did, was order china. In fact, he ordered it from a firm called Daguerre in France. And so one of the first sort of instances of White House china coming in, and it's sort of in a mass quantity, was with James Monroe. And the White House china tradition became a tradition, after that. Anyway, so let me sum up here. The first thing is this blue-gray American stoneware. This is called American stoneware. You see this everywhere in the antique shops and everything. And this is a typical piece. It's the cobalt oxide that turns the blue, and it's salt glazed. They add the salt at about 1625 degrees, and the salt that goes into the kiln goes in and it gives it this wonderful sort of orange peel skin quality to it. And it's vitrified. And vitrified just means that it becomes waterproof, so that whenever it's vitrified, stoneware is vitrified, so you can store all kinds of things in here. In fact, some of you may come from homes that still store stuff in here, so it's kind of cool. And then an example of hard paste porcelain from France. Oh, something else that's kind of cool about this is that when he put in the order for the White House china in France in 1817, there was 30 manufacturers in Paris at the time that could make pieces like this, and all 30 of them bid on that. Now, that could be for the money, but it also could be because Monroe was really beloved back in the time. Monroe and his wife were really beloved in France at the time. And so I speculate that all the firms really wanted to get in on that sort of presidential action. So all 30 of them bid. And there's an example of one of the earliest pieces of White House china in the country. There it is. And it's about 1817. And we know this because of the 20 stars that are around the eagle symbol. And there's an example of hard paste porcelain versus soft paste. And there's an example of the soft paste porcelain. A little bit creamier, a little bit tougher. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I want to let you know that starting today, I am going to be going to every other week. So it's going to be every other Monday starting at 2 o'clock. So just to let you know, so I won't be on next week, but I'll be on the week after, and I'll be doing it every other Monday at 2 o'clock every other week. Thank you so much for joining me. If you could give this video a share real quick, we'd certainly appreciate it. And as always, if you have any questions on the website, just email me anytime. So thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Okay? All right, bye.